We're beginning this week by looking at arguing for the existence of God. And before looking at our Jewish texts, it's worth saying something more general about arguments in this area. Now, one of the arguments that we'll be looking at begins by noting some feature of the world or universe, and then proceeding to show that if we want to explain the existence of that feature, we have to end up saying that there is a God who is responsible for it. Now, here's a really simple version of that type of argument, one that's used by many Jewish philosophers, but that has its origins in the Kalam, the school of Islamic theology that we introduced last week. And this Kalam argument is a version of an argument also known as the cosmological argument, because it begins with something about the cosmos. Here's the argument. First premise: if something begins to exist, then it has a cause. Second premise: the universe began to exist. Conclusion: therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, there are two things to note about this argument. The first is that it's what we call an a posteriori argument, meaning that it begins by appealing to something about our experience of the world and proceeds to prove the existence of God on the back of that part of our experience. So the argument is based on something known through experience, and that's the basic idea of something that is a posteriori. Most arguments for God's existence are actually of this nature. There is one famous argument that simply begins with a kind of a definition of God and proceeds to argue for his existence based simply on that definition. And that argument, known as the ontological argument, is what we call an a priori argument for the existence of God. It begins with something known independent of our experience. It doesn't appeal to any feature of the world as an a posteriori argument would. It just works from definitions and logic. The second thing to notice is that it's a discursive argument. It begins with a premise, some propositions, and then there's a gap that we have to bridge in order to move to the conclusion. Basically, we need to make some type of logical inference to move us from the premise to the conclusion. And most arguments for the existence of God are like this. But imagine now the following. Imagine I wanted to prove to you that there was, say, a bear in the woods. No idea what the bear's doing there, but there is a bear in the woods. Now, one way to prove this to you would be to show you some evidence, maybe some footprints and dead carcasses from the bear's lunch. And you may or may not accept this as solid proof, but either way, I'm providing you with some evidence, and you now have to make the jump to the conclusion. You need to do something to get from the one to the other. You need to make an inference. But imagine instead that I see the bear behind you and I yell, "Look," and you turn around and you see the bear. You now have proof the bear is there, but it's not a proof that starts with some evidence and then you have to make inferential leaps. There's no further work for you to do here to take you to the conclusion that there is a bear. You have experience to the bear itself. There's no need for inferences or for further argument. It's an argument from experience, but it's immediate. Now, it's worth thinking about what each of these approaches will tell you. So, for example, say I want to know if the bear is tame or not, or what color it is. Which is more likely to tell you? The discursive argument or the experiential approach? Now, this will become important as we look at our two different arguments for the existence of God, since, as you will see, each one follows one of the patterns of argument we have described here, and as we'll also see, each one therefore leads us to very different views of the nature of God.